I'm really digging whatever Chris is showing there. It's kind of interesting.
What
I was
I'm showing,
wondering,
Fred, since you asked, is an organ. This is a pump organ, is what this
Oh,
is.
nice. Nice.
I have a general question. Has anybody gotten the Gemini API to work with FileMaker?
That's the IBM one, right? I think, or not IBM, Google.
Is Google.
Yeah,
I've got the Chat GPT one working fine, but not and it doesn't look like the JavaScript is wrong when I look, at one of the JavaScript checkers. It seems to pull the information, but the API, my FileMaker just won't behave with it.
I've only used the Chat GPT one from FileMaker so far.
This is going to sound like a smart aleck question, but I have to do this for myself all the time. Did you ask Gemini how to do it?
Yes. In fact,
Okay.
I asked, and the script looked like it was good. I mean, it pulled things. It just didn't want to put them in to be sorted. I'm not sure exactly what the problem was. I also got some help and was working with some people from RCC Consulting, and they had the same trouble. So it wasn't just me trying to do it. I was able to write the script according to, Gemini's instructions, and then it just seemed to hang up on it. And apparently they're having trouble with it too, but I thought if maybe somebody solved it. I mean, if I ever solve it, I'll be happy to share what I solved, because it's driving me crazy. And Gemini actually is working better on searches than Chat GPT for this particular function that I'm requesting, because I'm requesting information from 2024 and Chat GPT doesn't have it, but Gemini pulls it up beautifully if I do a Google search on it.
I heard there was a little bit of discussion about working with AI. Somebody was working with Gemini.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I've been working with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I have to handhold it on a couple occasions, but I'll tell you that the older model, the O model, is better than the O1 when it comes to coding. The O1 tries to overly complicate stuff. It's trying to work it thinks that it's streamlining things, but like to me, I end up with these scripts that are just crazy looking. I'm like, how could I ever troubleshoot this? There's like too much. You could have done it. You could have chosen a much simpler way to whatever it is, store variables or whatever. So I am struggling a little bit with that, but I'm also learning a lot. I'm kind of not quite a senior developer yet. So there's some things that I'm challenged by, particularly if it involves math of any kind. So it's very useful in
Where's Eric? Somebody get Eric.
figuring out calculations.
I've had a better time with the Chat GPT with things that are not FileMaker. It's got, I think, a lot more code out there in the ether to learn from and fewer scripting examples. So I've had to correct it on a number of occasions. It does help sometimes in FileMaker. It'll help me maybe consolidate an out of control while statement or something like that. It'll make it a little more concise, or maybe give me a different direction to go on something. But yeah, it likes to invent functions that don't exist and stuff like that.
I've had that.
Very helpful.
It hallucinates. It's come up with some FileMaker functions for me. Say, if you want to solve this, just use this function. And I'm like, oh, hallelujah. I didn't know about that function. And I go find out.
I read about some lawyers that got into a similar problem using Chat GPT for legal arguments, and it created citations.
Yeah, the New York court, they got in big trouble over that.
We built a tool to use Chat GPT for something. Brian helped me do the connections, but then when we were working with it, I had it imagining that there were blog posts on our website that didn't exist, and so we had to be very careful with how we wrote the prompts.
I use Chat GPT just to, right now I'm just looking at a lot of different awards that people get, and I'm using it to the society just to pull the mission statement in their website. And it's been pretty good for that. It hasn't made things up because I'm doing something that's quite limited. It just goes to an organization and then it pulls, sort of what it does, compacts it to about 200 words, and then I have it because I'm doing some deep learning models, so I need a lot of keywords. I'm probably I did some chat GPT with them learning, some positive and some negative examples, to train it. And I did that on chat GPT, but I think I'm going to switch and do redo it on AWS because it looks like it's a slightly more friendly program to use. And also the university seems to want to support that.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the January meeting of the FileMaker Pro user group Dallas chapter. We're here a week late due to New Year's being last week, so we're glad to have everybody. If you're here, you know that we're meeting virtually instead of in person. If you showed up at Harmonic Data, well, you're probably banging on the door. Good luck with that. So anyway, we're glad all of it that have found it due to the inclement weather that we have going on have made it virtually here. And I'm sure we will have a good session here. We were going to have Jeremy Brown here, but to finish up the JavaScript presentation with a hands-on helping us configure our computers. And obviously that's not happening due to the inclement weather, but we're just moving that to February. So when you come to the February meeting, bring your laptop because he's going to help get everything installed that you need to use, integrate JavaScript and your web viewers and FileMaker and, finish up that presentation. So we will do that next month. Well, things are changing at Claris. I think a lot of you know that. We have a new interim CEO, Ryan McCann, and some other staffing changes have happened there too. So there's kind of a little bit of a flux going on at Claris for those of you keeping in touch with them. But I will say that next month, Ryan McCann wants to come and speak to our group for just like 20 minutes, a short amount of time, kind of give some direction of where Claris is going, particularly in regards to his role as interim CEO. In so doing, he wants us to give him, if we have any prepared questions, you don't have to have prepared ones for him, but if there are prepared questions, if you can either email them to me or you can put them in the chat or something here, he would like to be prepared to try to answer anything he can. Obviously, his answers are going to be very CEO-ish, that will be very very carefully worded. Still, I say he's gone out and he's done these little spiels to like the platinum partners, but those of us that aren't platinums, this is a good way for him to get some of that information out. So think during this meeting here while we have it, if you can think of a question you'd like to ask Ryan in his role as interim CEO, any concerns or directions that you're wanting to know about FileMaker, here's an opportunity to ask the interim CEO, which is kind of unusual for a user group to get to do. So fire that on over here. Okay, well, I think we'll turn it over to our MC, Sir Paul. You ready?
Oh, of course. So today we're instead kind of dropping back and punting, and I'm just kind of trying to moderate a little conversation here. My role will be to try to make it continue to flow and just make sure we don't go down too deep down any rabbit holes. We've already been chatting about interfacing FileMaker with AI. I had asked Brian to be ready to talk about some of the new features coming out in FileMaker. He was showing me this awesome new feature to do a search on the relationship graph. And if you've got some of the relationship graphs like we have, oh my God, what a blessing that finally is. It's the old hashtag YBAML. Where have you been all my life? Brian, do you want to talk any more about that or any other new features that we can talk about?
Sure. That's the open quickly function Paul's referring to. It showed up in a previous version with a lighter feature set. So it was restricted to things like scripts and layouts and I think files, and that was maybe it. One of the problems with that is the access controls and privileges. So when it was first available as a feature, it was a little bit too open, one might say. So it was allowing people that didn't have full access to get to layouts, that they shouldn't be seen or shouldn't even know exist or be able to get to. That was controllable with the manage layouts window and the manage scripts window. So you could check or uncheck various, items to prevent the open quickly from, being able to access those. But that's not, sometimes that conflicts with what you actually want to show. You might want to show things in those windows, but not maybe have them accessible. So there was a concern about that, which has been remedied in the newest version of FileMaker. There's in the custom privileges, there's a separate checkbox now where you can more tightly control that, for people who are not full access users. So that's one update on Open Quickly. The other one is that they've added other features to it. So instead of just going to, like, say, scripts or to layouts, like Paul said, it will search the relationship graph, which is crazy and super helpful. You can operate only on the files that are open. If you want, there's a little toggle switch in the Open Quickly window. So if you're getting too many matches, and it's just too hard to navigate the list of matches, you can constrain it to the file that's currently open if you want. But it's incredibly helpful. I've been using it, like Paul said, for the graphs that are just, I tend to remember it's in the upper left corner somewhere, or it's three entire screens to the right, or the bottom left corner, or it's hard to remember all that stuff sometimes. And the table occurrences have very similar names, so it's a little tough sometimes to get to the right one, quickly. But it's been a godsend for stuff like that. It's something that I wished was in FileMaker for a pretty long time. So very excited about. Now we just got to get clients to, everybody to update to new enough versions where we can use it in staging. but super helpful feature. I'm very glad they added it.
So I promised Brian he didn't have to make a presentation today. So this is a conversation. So feel free to toss in your own perspectives, commentary. Can't wait to use it, that kind of thing. Everybody take yourselves off mute. It's okay. This is an informal meeting today. What other exciting things do we have coming from FileMaker, Brian?
Some of the recent ones from the November release is that there are no more limits now on OData or the data API, which is a good thing. Just trying to manage that. If you were ever building solutions that might need to have 500-ish data API sessions or tokens that were live at any given time, that could be a problem. You'd have to write a lot of sort of session handling code that to try to stay under those limits and be a little more aggressive with deleting tokens and things like that. But as of the 21.1 release in November, the limits for OData and the data API are both they're gone. They don't exist anymore, which is fantastic.
That sounds great. Greg, you looked enthusiastic about that. Is that something you've been working with?
No, it's just one of the things that we were considering implementing at some point for one of our clients. And that was kind of one of the things that gave us pause before doing so.
Yeah.
Always good when they decide to take limits off of things, especially considering how well Claris has handled the idea of limitations on any of those, especially things like, the API data limits.
Mm. Yeah, just not having to even worry about writing the code to even manage the tokens, really, in case you run into it later, or maybe if your solution ends up scaling, to the point where you need to start adding things or considering things to manage the sessions. It's just nice to not have to worry about any of that now.
Very cool. Anybody else see anything new coming in FileMaker that's got them excited about it?
There's one thing that Brian mentioned to me I've yet to try, and maybe you can explain a little bit more, Brian.
Yeah.
But it had to do with connecting into any of Amazon's APIs, and the credentialing process is it's cut down to a quarter of the size of code.
Oh yeah.
That's new, isn't it?
It is. I'm not sure if it first appeared in the November release or if it was maybe one prior to that, since Claris is doing more frequent releases now, but at the very least it's in the new version because we're using it.
Yeah.
It's an insert from URL. It's a curl header. And I believe the header is AWS-SIG v4. So SIG v4. And what that does, if you've ever worked with AWS prior to this, there's a lot of code, a lot of boilerplate code
Yep.
required because Amazon, all of the pieces that you need, everything's got to be encrypted the right way. The signature has to be, sent over the right way. Just generating all of that information. It involves timestamps, usernames, secrets. It was doable before, but it took a lot more code for sure. And now you can all you need is the user and the secret. And you pass that as a user : secret string into that curl header. And that's literally it. You don't need any other scripting to generate that signature file now. So it drastically simplifies that stuff. It's great.
Yeah, I really just had to find someone else's code to do it in the past.
Yeah.
Plug in the points applicable
I
to
was
me.
suspicious that it was going to actually work with that one curl header, but because I was looking at the one, when you and I were working on that project, and
we had to use
looking at the example, and I thought, oh no, that's a lot of lines.
Yep.
Brian, where are we using that? Is it with S3 or is it also with
Yes.
S6?
Yes to both, actually. It does require, if your clients are not on the newest release of FileMaker, you'd have to wrap that in a PSOS.
Right. So
in
with
our
this
case,
particular client, our servers are on 24. Our clients are mostly 23 still, except for the dev stack. So we're just running it server side.
Yes. One thing I did run into that might be worth mentioning is when you write a file to S3, there's an optional header that you can pass to make the file publicly readable when the file is put to the bucket. So if you've got things that you're putting in S3 that need to be publicly reachable, say maybe you're hosting images for a website or something like that, and it's something that's meant to be publicly accessible, there is a header that you can pass that will do that at the time that the file is written, but that may or may not be supported in the environment that you're in. So if you run into that, you'll need to talk to whoever your provisioning person is. In this case, I talked to Fred, and because I ran into a little hiccup there. I was trying to make a file. I was using a script that had that curl header in it, and it was causing the call to fail.
If you're using an S3 bucket, you can actually set up the bucket to be public all the time, of course.
Yeah.
And it can be completely private all the time as well. Or you can do a magical thing where something is completely locked down, but you can get the special magic header link and share it with people, and then they can still get it when it's hidden. So there are some different options that are available for that. And this is what we were doing, right?
Yeah.
But what my code interrupted. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that.
So we definitely want to get my more secure code back into that.
I mean, it was my fault for passing that curl header. I was using a script from another project I was working on before I got to Harmonic, where the files did need to be publicly reachable. And so in order to sort of kickstart that script off, I included that header, which really shouldn't have been in there to begin with for what we're doing at Harmonic. But I just ran into it, so I thought I'd maybe mention it.
Hello, Jonathan. Glad you made it. Dennis, what's going on in your neck of the woods? How's the weather in Colorado?
Dennis, you're muted.
If anybody who would never be muted.
Oh, we still can't hear you, Dennis.
Still can't hear you. Teams is the problem. I had to reboot my machine this morning because of it. When I first logged in, everybody's voice was. So
that's weird.
Hey, for those of us who use SQL, FileMaker has a completely new execute SQL function. Whose only purpose is to return, finally, error codes when there's a problem. And I'm not really sure why they had to make a different function to be able to do that, but at least we got it.
Yeah.
Finally. So after a decade now?
A version of execute SQL that will return something other than a question mark?
Yeah. Well, it still returns a question mark, but it returns a question mark with extra.
Oh.
So there's that.
New and improved question mark.
Yeah.
I had that on my list as well. I haven't used it yet in production or anything, but it was.
No, I haven't updated anything yet either.
Yeah.
Dennis, I'm guessing you're asking, can you hear me now? And no, we can't.
Dennis, you may need to just quit out of the app and restart. That's what I typically have to do with Teams, just so you know.
There was one sort of sleeper feature in reviewing for this sort of meeting I ran across and forgot about. There in the new release, the November release, there's also we've always been able to constrain found sets, of course, but there's a constrained found set without indexes option now. So when you do the constrain in the little popover that shows up, if you check the box for without indexes, it will do what it says. It will constrain without traversing an index. And you might be wondering, why would I not want to use an index? Aren't they faster? But
Yes, that's what I'm wondering.
right. As was I. It turns out if you happen to be starting from a very large, like multi-million record set, and you do your find request, and you get down to, you sort of your first pass at a group of records, and then you want to constrain from there. What happens is it's indexing all those millions of records, and it's sort of having to traverse that when you do your constrain. And there are times if you're in a situation like that, starting with a gigantic table, and you're going a couple of passes deep, it can be faster. I haven't done this in person yet, but it because it doesn't have to traverse and index 4 millions of records in order to do the constrain.
Only the
There are
records that you
instances
have
where it can
in
be
the found
faster.
set.
Right.
Right. No, that is a very good point. Run into that a bunch. There's a couple of clients that we have, one in particular, where we deal with over 1 million records and numerous tables.
Yes.
And the beach ball kills us sometimes and things like that.
So I'll be interested in doing maybe some side by side, stuff when we get a little bit of a breather. I'd be curious to see how much faster that might be. Nobody likes beach balls.
Has anyone used the get system storage available function yet?
No. What problem do you think that
What?
would solve?
That tells you how much room is left on the drive that your solution is hosted on.
Oh.
And for those of us who like to just get sort of a daily update on things like that, because we've had systems where the change on that on a daily basis can be pretty significant. And that is a way that I thought we would just sort of use that to generate an email once a day to give us that information. And that way know like what our trajectory is, right? Over the course of, the next month or so. Because it's one thing to have to wait until you actually get a notification, which is obviously when it's too late at that point, essentially, versus sort of being able to plan it out a little bit better, right? And knowing what your sort of daily rate of usage is on that drive space.
Now, is this on the server, Greg?
Yes.
Are you able to
So,
hear me now,
will
Fred?
it-
Yes,
Yeah,
Dennis, we can hear you.
yes, we can. Marvelous. So,
We
Greg,
should, everybody should have just said no.
Oh, you're right, Greg.
Yeah, I know.
We
That was
really had an opportunity that was missed there.
Still
Yeah,
can't
so
hear
Dennis-
Dennis.
Does this new
Just
new
for your
function
information,
grab
Fred.
the actual drives?
Fred,
Like, so
the-
we always have a data and a backup drive. Does it tell you those drives or just your system drive?
Just the one. It says here the system drive where FileMaker software is installed. So actually, it's not even where your file is installed. It's just the actual. My guess is the C drive.
Right. Okay.
Which is-
there we go.
Actually, now I think about it, if you have it stored on a separate drive, that doesn't really help you too much, does it?
That's right. That's why I wanted to ask the question. All right, Dennis, you can go. You can talk.
Just letting you know, the reason you guys couldn't hear me is because Microsoft Teams has a setting that's called noise suppression. So it was suppressing my noise.
You were just noise to Microsoft
That's
Teams
rude.
accordingly.
It's
Yeah.
nice to be appreciated, In answer to your previous question, the weather here today is gorgeous and sunny. It's probably only 50 degrees out. We haven't had snow for a few days.
So we have a new CEO. He wants to come and speak with us next month.
I wrote to him recently about something that I don't want to bring up next month because he already heard it from me, but I don't know if other people experience the same thing. I suffer from what's called red-green color blindness, which is now I understand it's called protan, and it makes it impossible for me to see certain things in FileMaker, like the little red dot in the inspector where you save themes or styles. that's just totally black as far as I see. And I also have difficulty in the status toolbar being able to see the items that are like a medium gray. So I have to put my nose right up to my screen if I want to see the record counter, for example.
Also, none of your brown pants are actually brown.
Well, I wouldn't know that because to me, they're whatever
That's what I'm saying.
color was, you know, and people often think that if you have red-green blindness, you can't drive a car because you can't distinguish the red and the green light, but that isn't true because they're brightly lit with a light bulb in the traffic signal. And it just occurred to me that Apple is so conscious of disabilities that maybe they ought to give some attention to those of us who are colorblind.
Yeah, of course, if you want to be compliant with their disability stuff, you have to use the light color mode instead of the dark color mode.
You're right. And when I go back to that these days, I find that it's blinding.
The light colored mode.
Yeah, the light mode is, I'm just not familiar with it anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, don't mock the handicapped.
You call it disabled now, Dennis.
Well,
Welcome to the year 2000.
yeah, it used to be a problem for me many years ago when I was married and my ex-wife didn't like my turning on the bedroom light in the morning to get dressed. I would find myself putting on the wrong color socks, mixing the blues and the blacks together and suffering the indignity of going places and people telling me that my socks were the wrong color. So just, I've had this all my life.
I know I'm constantly checking the color of the color of socks of the people around me to make sure that they match so that I can mock them if they don't.
Well, that's why I attend virtually, because if I showed up in person, you'd probably make fun of me.
We'd make fun of you anyway, Dennis.
I
Just-
didn't know I was going to be the
FileMaker. Excuse me. Somebody say something while I cough.
Hey, Taylor,
You can
question. Since we're not talking about ETS things, can we talk about the backlog, the community backlog? Since I believe that's public, right? Where you vote on
Yeah.
features and they
That's
mark
public.
things as in progress or not. That's okay, yeah?
Yes.
That would be something to discuss with Ryan for sure.
Okay, good.
Because even if he's an interim CEO, he can assign people to tasks. And in Rick Kelman's absence, it would be nice if somebody would be in charge of that.
Yeah. One of my questions of him is, has he ever used a data viewer or has he ever used a debugger? I'm always surprised when you talk to the upper management there or the legal counsel or any of them, none of them know anything about writing a script. And you're just like, and yet you run this company. Okay.
I've had a lot of trouble when I've done exports or into an SQL file, and there have been records that are transferred, except the field here and there isn't transferred because I have something wrong in my field in FileMaker that SQL doesn't like. And does anyone have a script that will tell you which record has the error and where the error might be?
Well, the new eSQL that FileMaker has is supposed to return errors and tell you what the error is, but it's usually like what column is misnamed and things like that. I don't know that it returns record errors.
I mean, I wrote a script that was really cumbersome that you went through each record and transferred it. And then if there was an error code that showed up, you could know that and stop the thing, it would do it. But when you're moving thousands of records or updating them, it's a little cumbersome. I mean, I've had to do it the old fashioned way of, taking half of them, seeing if the error's there, then taking the next half of them and seeing, the old fashioned way of finding an error. But I just wondered if there was anyone had figured out a slicker way to do it than the old fashioned way.
Well, when I've had large sets that I wanted to make sure were good to go over, one of the things I made sure was all the characters that I was trying to transfer were ASCII. So I do a filter to make sure that because that frequently throws SQL off. Were you using inserts or were you using ESS?
Insert.
Okay, well, that's the safer way. So,
but I know what the problems were, and they were often that I had some text in a field that I didn't know and things like that when it was a numeric field. But I can debug things but I just wondered that it was easier, in fact, for me to do it the old fashioned way than for me to spend hours writing a script, as it turned out.
Well, what I do is, for example, the current one I'm working on is the NCR's Counterpoint. And so I just get their schema and I run everything in FileMaker through their schema on, it tests everything for the max characters and, stuff like that. And so, but, I take their schema and dump it into a table in FileMaker and use it to, flush everything through there. And only after it passes the quality control check does it try to do the insert. And that's how I make sure that, but you have to have somewhere, whatever solution you're working with, that can give you the schema and all the, requirements, this is a number field, is it an integer field, is it a date field, is it how many maximum characters, how many minimum characters is it required, all those things. But a lot of these big systems do have a table like that. And that's what I usually use to test all my stuff against it first.
I may have to talk to you more about that because I'm not familiar with that ability. But right now, I've got all my fields cleaned up, but it won't last. It will not last.
Well, the other thing too is you can mimic depending on your situation, you can go try to mimic the same rules in your FileMaker validations, max mid characters and the type of characters in it type thing. So, that can also be a way of tackling that too. But FileMaker people tend to like to put lots of things in that the SQL people would not expect.
That's well put. Yeah. And anybody else having problems they would like to get feedback on?
Yeah, I ran into one yesterday that is a pet peeve of mine where a dialog appears that tells you that the record cannot be saved because this field cannot be modified. And then you have to search to figure out what field are they talking about. There's a similar dialog that comes up sometimes when you are changing the view of a layout, let's say from list to table or vice versa, and it asks you if you want to save this change. And you haven't really changed it yet.
Have you customized keep in mind that this could be a record that you imported that didn't go through the validations, and then when you try to edit on it, something you're not editing is another field in there that doesn't meet the validation.
Yeah, you're right. The answer to the first one I mentioned is always somewhere in the field definitions. It's just that it's a stupid dialogue that could just as easily tell you the name of the field.
Yeah.
So you go directly to it.
So real quick, are we talking about the message if custom validation fails, that box?
No,
By
that
chance?
one has its own issues. I'm just
Okay.
talking about one. I don't remember what it was that I had to uncheck yesterday. It was either unique or not empty. That was one of the characteristics of a field. Or maybe it was that it was a field that was defined as a calculation. And when I changed it to a number field with auto enter calculation, the dialogue went away. It's just an annoying dialogue. And many FileMaker dialogues were written 25 years ago by people who didn't really know grammar and English well enough to choose the right words.
Yeah,
In that same lane, one of the reasons I mentioned it, I was wondering if there was that text field, if custom validation fails. Even though it's not in your case, that's one of the new features in the 21 release from November. That box is no longer a string. It's a calc window. So if you have custom validation that fails, you can give them a dynamic message.
Yes.
You could write a let, you could grab whatever environment variables, users' names, the record you're working on. So it's not a text field or text box anymore, which I didn't know about. That was one of the sort of it was a blind spot for me in the release feature set. But it was when you were describing your issue there, it made me think if that would possibly help. But unfortunately, it won't in your case, but probably a welcome feature going forward.
Yes, I like when they always have a calculation option and not just solely text.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few other places they haven't done that on too, but I like to see them knocking those out.
Yeah. Anybody working on anything cool they want to brag about?
I ran into a pleasant surprise a week ago working on a thing for a client who has some field techs who use Android devices. And I found that when I went and bought an old Samsung Android phone from Walmart for $64, because I don't need it to make phone calls. I only need it to work on Wi-Fi so that I can see what the FileMaker behavior looks like. Turns out that you can insert a photograph into a field as long as the browser, I think as long as the browser is Chrome.
So much for that wonderful Android support we had coming.
Well, I know we were promised that for years, but
Well, for many years they promised we'd never get it. And then one day they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to do Android." Oh, yeah, maybe one day.
They thought live code could just be easily
Yeah.
going, swap it in, it will work, and they realize it doesn't because it has to be recompiled every time. It's not like FileMaker Go. It's anyway.
well, Android might be a good question to give Ryan next week.
Yeah, that probably.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I almost would say, why don't you get me, Linux user interface, for Ubuntu or something, because I see that growing more and more. So,
Yep. I remember actually putting in that request years ago, and I think I got like a phone call from them, like, "This is what you want? You sure?" Like, it's like, "Yeah, I do."
So recently worked on a system where we're implementing an HTML email function that's used in conjunction with the rich text editor. And one of the things that the customer wanted was to be able to add data in to just dynamically to these emails. But the thing is, they build templates, right? So they build these email templates and then they add the email template to the email by doing just a select from a list, and then they can modify it. But they still wanted to be able to have, like, in these templates, a way to have, like, basically a data point indicated that will be swapped out for the actual data later on. And so we kind of went through a lot where, you just do like a substitute, but the dictionary of terms just ended up getting so long. So what we ended up figuring out that we could do, and this is actually probably a fairly simple solution, and maybe some of y'all have come up with this, but when we finally figured it out, it was fine. So we build the dictionary for them, let them know what terms they can use, but what terms get sent along with the email, that depends upon the email that you're sending, right? And they can also go ahead and create their own email and put terms in there. And so we don't know which one is which. So what we end up doing is, with the email as it goes along, it basically goes through the email and it looks for, because we prepend and append characters to the beginning and the end of all these terms that we use that need to be swapped for data. And all it does is it just goes through because the end product or the end result is just an email send, like, script that a bunch of different, like, other scripts feed into. So it's basically just kind of sends a bunch of JSON data with everything that's necessary for sending the email, generating the email, all that kind of stuff, and then substituting out all this data for it. So instead of, like, having to tell that end script, okay, now if you see this, go get this data, what we do is we're now just sending the data along as a JSON object, or as part of the JSON object, and basically all you have to do is put the term in as the key name, and then it basically gets a list of the keys, prepends and appends those characters to the beginning and end of it, and all the code according to what it needs to be for HTML. And then it goes and it looks for that in there, and if it sees it in there, it swaps it out with whatever the data point is that you sent along with it in the JSON, and it's problem solved. So we kind of eliminate a lot of that heavy lifting from the end result. We basically just kind of shunt all that stuff along with it at the beginning, which is actually really nice. Saves us a lot of time and effort at the end. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, the way I described it.
Very cool.
What's your favorite tool for sending emails?
Oh, you mean like just how am I sending these HTML emails? Oh, we use 360 Works email tool.
Okay.
We were going to use Cloud Mail because they're using SES, but there's really not much purpose to it because they don't really care about the metrics. It's not really on. Their main thing for SES is just to make sure that they can keep track of people who come back and say, don't send me emails anymore. And that's it.
Greg, I think there's one part of that I'm a little confused on.
Yeah.
Because I had to build something like that years ago. And I think you mentioned something that we did not use, but you mentioned just like the actual point at which the user is like managing these templates. You said it's just through a rich text editor.
Right.
Like, is that just done? Like, how are you doing that? Is like just in a web viewer or something, or?
Yeah, the built-in, or sorry, the add-on rich text editor that comes with FileMaker is what we're using.
There's an add-on called rich text editor. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So if you go into your add-ons on the little pane on the left side of your screen, that's one of them comes with it. You just drag and drop it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. It was considerably more manual the way we went about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Without that,
because we
I
brought up a
wouldn't
web
wanna mess with
viewer
it.
and it went out to like essentially a rich text editor hosted by some other external site, and you just kind of pull out all the HTML and bring it back into FileMaker. Yeah. Okay.
There are
Cool.
probably better solutions than that one. And I will tell you right now, that thing has a lot of problems of its own, as I'm sure a lot of people here would agree.
Sure.
It is not perfect, not by a long shot.
Okay.
So
Something.
really, everything that we have done has been basically working around what we know about the sort of shortcomings of the rich text editor to get it to work.
Okay.
Anybody else got any questions or problems that they'd like the group to discuss, or anything they want to brag about? Any favorite new features?
Brian mentioned just talking about the backlog, and there is a decent number of rich discussion points on there. So I guess it's just where the community sort of votes on, like, hey, we really want to see energy put into this feature or product. And
Are you looking at that now, Alan?
I am. Yeah. Yeah.
What jumps out at you?
I'll post it also just in the Teams chat. People look at it. I think really just some of the updates they're trying to do with Clara Studio, I think are really exciting. So like you could have related fields within calculations or these different frames where you can build out objects and use them in multiple places. You don't have to rebuild it. I see that kind of stuff. And I think like long term, is this really what Claris wants to sell as opposed to FileMaker? That's just getting to be at like a rapidly maturing tool to where FileMaker is really useful on the administrative end, or you're actually like building solutions, but your general end user, will they just be connecting to your data through something like Studio? So things like that. So it gives me that idea.
Yeah, one of the things that is in that community backlog is with respect to insert from URL. There is in progress, so they've elected to take it on and are actively working on it at least, is there's going to be support for async calls in the insert from URL, which is, you know, presumably that means you won't see a transferring dialog window for, 20 or 30 seconds waiting on a longer call, to finish. So I haven't seen anything I haven't seen any examples of it because it's, it's not even ETS, it's just in progress. So what that implementation looks like, I'm not really sure, but they were explicit about it being async support. So that's a pretty big deal. And it's apparently going to be easier for us to define the curl options, which would be welcome. I take that to mean that there's going to be something other than having to escape, all of the headers basically in a calc window, which you can do, but after you've done it over and over, it's a lot easier to deal with. But being able to just type in headers without worrying about the escaping and extra spaces and stuff like that. Pretty common source for bugs where you forgot to add a trailing space or a leading space in between a header, and throws off your request, and or you didn't escape it the right way. And so easier curl options, and async is apparently coming at some future date.
Scrolling down this backlog list, fascinating.
Yeah.
Things on this list.
Yeah, international dates and times are apparently going to be supported as well in a more useful way, other than just like the data formatting, that we have to sometimes do to get something to display correctly. But it'll be something lower level than that, and maybe in the field definition, perhaps, when you go to field setup. That's my guess as to how they'll implement that. But anybody who works with APIs, which is probably a lot of us here, run into, dates of all types, different formats, different timestamps, Zulu time, decimals for seconds. So it should be a lot easier whenever they do add the international date and time support, whenever that is.
Would be nice.
My favorite is Unix time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the first things I do is create a UTC field in pretty much every table that's going to be doing that kind of work, and just mirror the mod stamp, make it into UTC, and then just use that for all the API calls. Get me records newer than this or older than that, or any kind of sync behavior where you need to be able to rely on the time being accurate and not worry about time zones or anything like that.
Yeah, always. All my stuff now has a UTC time for created and modified. So
I'm excited about this free tier for the Claris platform. I think that could be a really great way to help evangelize Claris and FileMaker.
yeah, I would really like that too. The question is, what are they going to do on it? The proposal I put to them was, you just take FileMaker Pro, you take out security, and you take out networking, and you give it away free. So, and then anybody who's going to need those, for like business purposes, then you would pay when you need networking and security. But everything else you could do in that way would get a lot of, people like college students or people, whatever, that get introduced to it, that would then down the road get in some employment situation. All right, well, I know how to do that in FileMaker, and if we use it in the company, we can share it. I really am hoping that comes out and is a way to do it. I will say, apparently they still do make probably about something like about 10 million a year in these individual licensing sales. So they'd have to justify how this will more than make up for that in the long run, but I think it will.
Is the FDS going away at some point? I still have an active one myself, but I was
That gets
Oh,
you
wow.
curious.
Yeah.
that gets you the server though, and this the free thing they're talking about giving out is just the client.
Okay.
So we ran into an interesting issue. This actually goes back to that same system that I was talking about earlier with the email. The email functions work great across the board, but the system, which is, I think, like 13 years old, it was built as a multi-file system, and it allows a bunch of users to access certain parts of it via WebDirect, right? And so what's happening with this is like I said, we use templates for some of these emails, and for some of those templates, we don't need it. There's not even like an interface. You just go ahead and send an email of this particular kind, and it goes and it grabs the template, changes out the data, what have you, and that does all that stuff on the server, and it's done. The problem we were running into is from one particular file where people were in, that when they went and they ran this, it could not open the templates because they were in a separate file, which are almost always in a separate file. The file in which they were built is separate from most of the places where people are doing their work. But it said it could not find the files. Error 100. Now, the users, the way that they're logged in, and the users have access to that file, so it's not that. And it also, the scripts are running with full access privileges. So we couldn't quite figure that one out. We were not able to understand why it was doing it that way. Anybody ever run into that? Oh, dead silence.
Sorry.
Normally, I'm happy to chime in, but I have not run into any of these things and know very little about software. So sorry, but here now it's not silent. I'm talking.
That was worth a shot.
Does
Robert.
anybody here use JSON query? Any fans?
No,
Is it
Uh,
JSON and the results?
Yes.
Oh,
It's a custom function by Steve Sanherrera, who is usually referred to as Steve SSH in various places, on the internet. But it's a custom function. It's free, and it's been a godsend for some of the stuff we've been doing recently at the office. Basically, imagine just sending a query statement, basically, to a 10,000 object JSON array, and being able to query that and get back useful information in a useful structure. So you can do things like look in this array, return me all of the first name values for, say, a customer with X amount of sales or something, and it will traverse that JSON array, and for all of the objects that match that criteria, like sales numbers or whatever, it will return an array. It will return whatever you want, but it will by default it will return an array of strings or numbers, just in a as its own JSON array. You can ask for sub elements inside of an object. You can ask for the structure that comes back to be entirely different. You can map fields, so if you need to rename some of the keys in the response, support stuff like that. But for anybody who's ever had to go through a multi-thousand, tens of thousands of object JSON array and make records out of them or get something useful out of it, you're probably using a while statement or something like that, and very convoluted, nested whiles even. Like, it's very difficult to write that. But I've been able to replace a couple of nested while statements with a literal one-line JSON query call and get back, data that I can use, right away, instead of having to try to massage it, after the fact. And it's been, if you go to github.com/Steve, now he's got it listed there. There's some FileMaker blogs where he's been interviewed about it as well that will probably come up in search results, but you can definitely get it at GitHub. It is such a complicated.
This is the custom function.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I put it in chat. I think it's the same one. Kevin Frank put on a presentation.
Yeah,
about
he
it
interviewed
with
him, I
Big FM
think.
early this year.
Yeah. They just updated it, I guess, back in October, November to version 2, I think. And he was
cool.
kind of making some rounds on some of the other user groups, being interviewed about it. But it's been fantastic. I couldn't really leave the call without giving a shout out. To Steve, just for making it. It's such a complex. If you look at the actual code for it, when you go to paste it, in to the custom function window, it's all minified. It's not really readable. It exceeded I think it's 10,000 or maybe it's 30,000 character limit for a custom function.
Yeah, I hate that limit too. I wish they need to change that big time.
And it's got so much functionality that he had to run it through a minifier just to get it to fit.
Wow.
But it does what it says. And he's got as part of you'll probably see it on like the Kevin Frank thing that you were talking about. Some of the blogs have a link to the demo file that may or may not be on GitHub. It may be there also. But the demo file has examples of all of the features with example JSON and what the function is basically doing. So you can fiddle with it all you want and, get comfortable with how it works. It does aggregation, sums, averages, missing values. So, objects that are missing keys, ranges. I'm trying to think of, it's got like 50 examples in the example file that he provides. So definitely check that out if you're working with very large JSON objects that you need to be able to query or get subsets out of that. It's way faster than trying to write a while.
Yeah.
So
I just
thank
threw
you,
up
Steve.
a link to the GitHub.
Oh, cool.
Brian, are you using that with the text tract responses?
I am. Yes. One of the first things I added because
Great.
that text
Great
track returns
example of
something
a-
like, yeah. The example that comes back from text track just for a single page document, 1,000 lines of JSON for a single page. So trying to traverse that with a while was going to be bad times, but it made
Makes
quick work
sense.
of it. It was very cool function. I'm glad he made it.
It was actually one of those things in the list of requested things for FileMaker to do natively, but anyway.
It's a pretty long function signature. I think it's got like 6 parameters. So it takes a little, you have to do it a few times to kind of get used to which one, since they're not labeled parameters, like other languages, it's a little tough to remember which parameter what you're supposed to put where, but once you get familiar with in what order they appear in the function, it works great though.
Well, we're coming down to the final few minutes of the meeting. I see we've had somebody join us there on Greg's screen.
Always. Can't avoid it.
Anybody got any last comments? Next month, we've got Jeremy Brown coming in, and he's going to be here in person. He's coming up from Florida doing JavaScript in FileMaker. And that's going to be an hands-on workshop. Bring your laptops. Check out either the email or the webpage for more details. There's links on how to get into Jeremy's community, and you can check out the video.
Is everybody else here in the?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Paul,
There's a
Paul,
glitch in
you
the
vanished
matrix.
into the nether.
Earlier in the meeting, everybody locked up, and I'm like, okay, I'm the one who's locked up. So I got out and came back in. I just thought that it happened again. I didn't see anybody moving even.
There's a guy I saw a video, this is completely unrelated to FileMaker, but I saw a video of a guy on a Teams call, and he, as a joke, just froze in place. Like he was in the middle of a sentence and he would just stop talking and stop moving. And he would basically use that as I'm having a bad connection. I'm going to have to disconnect from the call.
That's
kind of
great.
a thing, which was kind of funny.
Also, for next month's presentation, assuming that we don't have a February Snowmageddon, it will be February. Ryan McCann will be talking to us at the beginning of being our opener at 11. So we're going to start a little early to let him chat before Jeremy then does his live thing.
Any final thoughts, parting shots, anything else?
There's cool stuff in the ETS that I can't talk about. Maybe we'll talk about it at a future meeting.
And if you're not on the ETS and you're willing to do a little testing and provide feedback, it doesn't cost anything. It's just a matter of asking to join. So if you've been thinking about it, I enjoy being a part of it, seeing things that are coming ahead of time. So
where does one go to get into that, Taylor?
Well, you used to send an email to Rick Kalman, so I don't know who you send it to now. I guess maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Lawrence, I see your hand.
That'd be another question for Ryan. Who do we send to?
Yeah, who do we send it to? Good question.
Yeah, what are you doing now that you don't have Rick anymore? There's lots of questions.
Where'd Rick go?
Well, he's in Reno.
Reno.
But
He's on LinkedIn if you want to find him.
Yeah, he's out there. He sometimes attends various user group meetings, but yeah, I think that was a loss. But anyway,
Why don't you invite him to the February meeting, Taylor?
With Ryan,
special guest, unannounced. It'll be a surprise.
Yeah. Leave it to Dennis to come up with that one.
In fact, I invite about 300 people to the LinkedIn Live broadcast of this meeting. We're not doing that this month, but certainly Rick is one of those.
Good.
Well, at least
Okay.
we know he's a user. Ryan might not be.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I think we're good to go. Thank you for being here, everybody, and go make some great products this month, and we'll see you next month.